Ambassador Kane walked into the massive chamber on Nexus Prime with steady steps. The room was bigger than any building on Earth and filled with alien creatures from across the galaxy. Above him floated the lumens with their glowing bodies that looked like living light. To his left sat the Naxari with their snake-like bodies coiled on raised platforms. Their multiple eyes watched him with cold hatred. On his right were the Corvan delegates with their rock-like skin and massive bodies that could crush a human without effort. At the center of it all stood General Vex of the Vorthic Empire. His crystalline scales flashed bright red as anger filled his alien features. Kane had seen Vex before in diplomatic meetings, but never this angry. The general's 4 arms moved as he gestured wildly while speaking to the other delegates. Kane knew this meeting would be different from all the others. The human colonies had been growing for 50 years now. Earth had sent ships to dozens of worlds beyond their home system. Each colony followed the proper rules set by the Galactic Council. They asked permission before landing. They shared their technology. They traded fairly with alien species. Kane thought they had done everything right. He was wrong, General. Vex slammed his fist on the speaking platform with such force that the sound echoed through the entire chamber. The noise made Kane's ears ring, but he did not move or show fear. Every alien eye in the room turned to look at the single human standing in the center of their anger. "The human plague ends today," Vex shouted in his deep voice that sounded like grinding stone. "Your species breeds too fast and takes too much. You spread from world to world like a disease that cannot be stopped. The Terran containment protocols are now in effect." Kane felt his heart skip a beat. The Terran containment protocols were something humans had heard whispered about in dark corners of space stations. They were rules that could lock humanity inside their own solar system forever. No species had ever escaped them once they were put in place. Prime Speaker Vess of the Naxari uncoiled from her platform with smooth movements. Her serpentine body was longer than 3 humans standing end to end. When she spoke, her voice hissed like steam escaping from a broken pipe. 30 rotations, Kane. You have 30 rotations to remove every human from every world beyond. Sol, every colony ship must return to Earth. Every mining station must be abandoned. Every research post must be emptied. The chamber filled with sounds of agreement from hundreds of alien voices. Some roared, some clicked, some made noises Kane had never heard before. But all of them were united in one thing. They wanted humanity gone. Kane activated his translation device to make sure every word he spoke would be understood by every species in the room. The human colonies are legal settlements established under galactic law. Our people have broken no rules. We have harmed no one. We have the right to expand and grow just like every other species. A Lumen delegate floated down from the ceiling until it hovered just above Kane's head. Its voice sounded like music, but the words were harsh. Rights are given by those with power. You have no power here, human. You have no friends here. You have no future here. General Vex stepped closer to Kane until the human could smell the metallic scent of the alien's breath. Your species thinks it is special. You think your technology and your determination make you strong. But you are children playing with toys while adults make the real decisions. Kane looked around the chamber one more time. Thousands of aliens stared back at him with expressions ranging from disgust to amusement. Some species had ruled parts of the galaxy for millions of years. Others controlled resources that could build or destroy entire civilizations. The Vorthek alone had a military fleet that numbered in the hundreds of thousands, but Kane was not afraid. He had grown up hearing stories about humanity's early days in space. How they had built their first ships with primitive technology. How they had explored dangerous worlds that other species avoided. How they had survived disasters that would have ended weaker civilizations. Humans did not give up when things got hard. They got stronger. "I will take your message to Earth," Kane said in a voice that carried to every corner of the massive chamber. "But I have a message for you as well. Humanity has never backed down from a fight we did not start. We have never surrendered when defending our families. We have never stopped moving forward even when the entire universe seemed against us. The aliens in the chamber began to laugh. It was not a pleasant sound. Hundreds of different species, making hundreds of different noises that all meant the same thing. They thought Kane was making empty threats. Kane reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. It looked like nothing more than a simple communication unit, but it was much more than that. With one touch, he could send a message to every human ship captain, every colony governor, and every military commander in known space. "You want to see what humans do when cornered," Kane continued as he held up the device. "You want to test our resolve. You want to find out what happens when you threaten our children and our future. Very well, but remember that you chose this path. When the shooting starts, remember that you fired the first shot." General Vex laughed louder than the rest. "What will you do, human? Send your handful of ships against our mighty fleets? Call your few thousand warriors to fight our billions? You are one species against an entire galaxy." Kane pressed the button on his device. Somewhere in space, a message began traveling faster than light toward Earth and every human settlement. The message was simple, but it would change everything. It contained just 2 words that every human would understand. Condition read. The chamber fell silent as Kane put the device back in his jacket. He turned to leave, but stopped at the massive doorway that led out of the chamber. Without looking back, he spoke one final time. "You think you know humanity because you have met our diplomats and our traders? You think you understand us because you have studied our culture and our history. But you have never seen what we become when someone threatens our families. That is about to change." As Kane walked away from the chamber, he could hear the aliens beginning to talk among themselves again. Their voices were no longer filled with laughter. For the first time in the meeting, some of them sounded worried. Good. They should be worried. Kane knew things that the Galactic Council did not know. He knew about research projects that officially did not exist. He knew about ship designs that had never been tested in public. He knew about training programs that produced soldiers unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Most importantly, he knew that humanity had been preparing for this day since they first left Earth. They had hoped it would never come, but they had never stopped getting ready for it. As Kane boarded his ship to return to Earth, he allowed himself a small smile. The Galactic Council thought they were dealing with the same primitive species that had barely crawled out of their own solar system. 50 years ago, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Admiral Blake stood on the bridge of his ship deep in space where no sensors could find him. The ship was called Nemesis, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Its hull was black as the void between stars and covered with technology that bent light around it like water around a stone. To any alien sensor array, the ship simply did not exist. 3 weeks had passed since Ambassador Kane delivered the Galactic Council's ultimatum to Earth. 3 weeks since humanity had been given 30 rotations to abandon everything they had built beyond their home system. The Council thought humans would spend those weeks packing their belongings and preparing to retreat. They were wrong. Lieutenant Torres sat at the weapons control station running final checks on systems that officially did not exist. Her fingers moved across controls that could unleash destruction beyond the imagination of most species. "Sir, all phantom drives are operating within normal parameters. No energy signatures detected by our passive scanners." Blake nodded as he watched the tactical display showing their target. Ahead of them, a Corvan mining fleet stripped valuable minerals from a belt of asteroids. 30 massive ships worked with mechanical precision to feed raw materials into the Council war machine. Each ship carried a crew of thousands and enough firepower to destroy a small moon under normal circumstances. Attacking such a fleet would be an act of war that could end human civilization. But these were not normal circumstances. The Council had already declared war on humanity. They just did not know the war had already begun. "Commander Vale, report on other strike teams," Blake said to his second-in-command. Vale's cybernetic eye glowed blue as she accessed the quantum communication network that connected all Phantom ships. The network operated on principles that most alien scientists claimed were impossible. Information traveled instantly across any distance without leaving traces that conventional sensors could detect. Ghost Squadron is in position near the Naxxari Supply Depot at coordinates 7-7-Mark-9. Wraith Division has locked onto the Vorthik Research Station in the Gamma Sector. Shadow Wing is ready to hit the Lumen energy collectors around their homeworld. All teams report green status and await your orders. Blake studied the tactical information flowing across his screens. The Phantom Fleet was humanity's most classified military project. Ships that could phase in and out of normal space at will. Weapons that could tear apart enemy vessels before they knew they were under attack. Crews that had been enhanced with technology that pushed human capabilities beyond their natural limits. The project had begun 40 years ago, when human intelligence first learned about the Terran containment protocols. Earth's leaders knew that. Eventually, the older galactic powers would see humanity as a threat. They had decided to be ready when that day came. "Sir, we are receiving priority communications from Earth Command," Torres announced. Fleet movements detected throughout Council space. They are not just posturing anymore. Blake's expression hardened as reports flooded in through the quantum network. Massive Vorthak battle groups were moving toward human colonies. Naxxari infiltration fleets had been spotted near shipping lanes that supplied human settlements. Corvan mining ships were being converted into military transports. The Council was preparing for what their propaganda channels called the Great Cleansing. The plan was simple and brutal. Overwhelming force applied simultaneously across human space. Every colony cut off from supplies. Every human ship hunted down and destroyed. Every man, woman, and child either killed or forced back to Earth to live under permanent blockade. The Council believed they had every advantage: superior numbers, advanced technology, millions of years of military experience. They had conquered dozens of species using the same tactics: isolate, surround, destroy. But they had made one critical mistake. They had given humanity time to prepare. All ships, this is Admiral Blake beginning Operation Ghost Dance. Execute simultaneous strikes on all assigned targets. Remember, we are not just fighting for ourselves today. We are fighting for every human child who will never be born if we fail. We are fighting for every dream that will never be fulfilled if we lose. We are fighting for the right of our species to reach for the stars. Blake paused for a moment, watching his crew make final preparations. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were volunteers who had undergone genetic modifications and cybernetic enhancements that transformed them into something beyond baseline humanity: faster reflexes, enhanced intelligence, perfect coordination through neural links that allowed them to function as a single organism when needed. The alien species of the galaxy thought they knew what humans were capable of. They had seen human diplomats and traders. They had studied human culture and technology. But they had never encountered humans who had been specifically designed for war. "Phase drives to full power," Blake commanded. "All weapon systems online. Prepare to engage." The Nemesis shimmered as reality bent around it. For a moment, the ship existed in normal space and somewhere else at the same time. Then it snapped back into the physical universe directly behind the largest Corvan mining vessel. The aliens on the mining ship never knew what hit them. Quantum torpedoes tore through their hull like paper. Energy beams designed to cut through planetary crust sliced their ship into pieces. In less than 10 seconds, a vessel that had taken decades to build was nothing but expanding gas and metal fragments. Across the mining fleet, alarms began screaming as more human ships appeared from nowhere. The Corvan crews tried to fight back, but their weapons were designed for stripping asteroids, not space combat. Their ships were built for cargo capacity, not maneuverability. It was not a battle, it was an execution. "Sir, all targets in this sector have been eliminated," Torres reported. "No survivors detected, no distress signals transmitted." Blake nodded as reports flooded in from other strike teams. The Naxxari supply depot had been reduced to atoms. The Vorthak research station was gone. The Lumen energy collectors were drifting debris. Across Council space, critical infrastructure was being systematically destroyed by enemies. That could not be seen until it was too late, but Blake knew this was just the beginning. "Set course for Nexus Prime," he ordered. "It is time to take this war to their front door." As the Phantom fleet vanished back into the spaces between dimensions, Blake allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Council thought they were fighting. The same primitive humans who had barely left their own solar system. 50 years ago, they were about to learn what evolution really meant. General Vex had never known fear like this. The mighty Vorthic warrior stood in the emergency command center buried deep beneath Nexus Prime, watching his civilization burn on 1,000 different screens. Each display showed the same story. Council assets across the galaxy were being destroyed by an enemy that struck without warning and vanished without trace. "Report." Dex roared at the trembling Corvin technician operating the main tactical display. The rock-skinned alien's voice shook as he read from his instruments. 47 supply stations destroyed. 28 research facilities obliterated. 61 mining fleets eliminated. The attacks came from nowhere, General. Our sensors detected nothing until the explosions began. Prime Speaker Vess slithered into the command center, moving faster than Vex had ever seen the serpentine creature move. Her usually perfect scales were dulled with stress, and her multiple eyes darted nervously around the room. "The humans have rejected our ultimatum. But this level of destruction is impossible. Our intelligence reports show they possess no military capability beyond their home system." The first explosions shook the command center as something struck the orbital defenses high above them. Through the reinforced viewing ports, they could see the ancient shield generators that protected Nexus Prime beginning to fail. Brilliant flashes of light marked the death of each defensive platform. Technology that had protected the galactic capital for 1,000,000 years was being systematically dismantled by an enemy they could not see. "Impossible," Vex snarled as he watched another shield generator explode in a ball of superheated plasma. "Our orbital defenses are the strongest in the galaxy. Nothing can penetrate them." A new voice answered him from the center of the room. A holographic projection materialized, showing a scarred human face that Dex did not recognize. The man wore the uniform of what appeared to be a human military officer, but no such force was supposed to exist. "You wanted to know about human military capability," the projection said in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Allow me to provide a demonstration." The image shifted, showing spacecraft unlike anything in the Council databases. Ships that appeared from empty space, struck with devastating precision, and vanished before return fire could be targeted. The aliens in the command center watched in horrified silence as their most secure facilities were reduced to expanding clouds of debris. "Phase drive technology," the human officer continued. "Quantum torpedo systems, neural link tactical coordination, gravitational manipulation weapons, technologies your scientists dismissed as impossible because they could not understand the principles involved." General Vex stared at the displays, showing the systematic destruction of everything he had spent his life protecting. The Vorthic Empire commanded fleets that numbered in the hundreds of thousands. They possessed weapons that could crack planets and shields that could stop stellar radiation. How were they being defeated by a species that had barely left their own star system? "Who are you, human?" Vex demanded. "Admiral Blake, commanding the Terran Defense Fleet," the projection replied. "Though I suppose the name hardly matters. What matters is what you have forced us to become." The tactical displays updated with new information that made every alien in the command center freeze in shock. Human ships were not just attacking isolated targets. They were moving in coordinated patterns that surrounded every major Council world. Fleets that had been invisible to all sensors were now revealing themselves as they took up positions around the heart worlds of galactic civilization. "You demanded that humanity withdraw from the colonies we built through decades of peaceful expansion," Blake continued as massive explosions continued to rock the command center. "Instead, we are withdrawing you from existence, permanently." A Lumen intelligence officer flickered into the room, its ethereal form pulsing with panic. "General, the planetary shields are down to 30% power. Human ground forces are beginning. Orbital insertion. Our estimates show at least 50,000 troops in the first wave. 50,000 troops. The number hit Dex like a physical blow. Nexus Prime was defended by the finest military units from a dozen species. Automated defenses covered every possible landing zone. The planet was supposed to be unconquerable, but the humans were not trying to conquer it. They were trying to destroy it. "Sir, our communication arrays are being jammed by some kind of quantum interference," reported a Naxari technician. "We cannot contact our fleets. We cannot coordinate our defenses. We cannot call for reinforcement." Blake's projection flickered as another explosion shook the building above them. "You assume that because humanity was young we must be weak. You believe that because we were outnumbered we must be helpless. You convinced yourselves that age and numbers were the only measures of strength." The lights in the command center failed as the main power grid was severed by weapons fire from above. Emergency illumination cast everything in a hellish red glow that made the alien faces around X look like demons from ancient nightmares. But strength is not about how long you have existed. Blake's image continued even as the building shook from repeated impacts. Strength is about how quickly you can adapt, how efficiently you can learn, how far you are willing to go to protect what you consider sacred. A new sound reached them through the reinforced walls. The distinctive whine of human plasma cutters, working through the blast doors that protected the command center. Somehow, human soldiers had penetrated the deepest levels of the most secure, building on the most protected world in council space. "You wanted to test human resolve," Blake said as his projection began to fade. "You wanted to see what we would do when cornered. You wanted to find out what happens when you threaten our children and our future." The blast doors began to glow, cherry red as the human cutters worked their way through metal that was supposed to be impenetrable. Vex could hear voices speaking in human languages just beyond the barrier, voices that belonged to soldiers who had somehow traveled across the galaxy to bring war to the heart of galactic civilization. "Now, you know," Blake concluded as his image disappeared entirely, "when you back an apex predator into a corner it does not surrender, it eliminates the threat." The blast doors fell inward with a crash that shook dust from the ancient ceiling. Through the gap came human soldiers wearing armor that seemed to absorb light itself. Their weapons hummed with barely contained energy and their faces were hidden behind masks that made them look more like machines than living beings. The lead soldier spoke in a voice that carried through every translator in the room. "This is Colonel Rivers of the Terran Liberation Army. You have 60 seconds to surrender before we demonstrate why fighting humans in close combat is not recommended." General Vex looked around the command center at the representatives of species that had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. All of them were cowering behind control consoles and instrument panels like frightened children. The mighty Galactic Council had been reduced to this, hiding in underground bunkers while human soldiers decided their fate. As the 60 seconds ticked away, Vex realized that everything he thought he knew about the galaxy had been wrong. The Council had not been defeated by superior numbers or advanced technology. They had been defeated by a species that refused to accept defeat. The age of the Galactic Council was ending. The age of humanity had begun. Deep beneath the burning ruins of Nexus Prime, the surviving Council members huddled in an emergency shelter that had been built to survive the death of stars. The massive chamber had been carved from solid bedrock and reinforced with the strongest materials known to galactic science. It was supposed to be the ultimate refuge for the leaders of galactic civilization. Instead, it had become their tomb. General Vex sat on the cold floor with his back against a wall that still shook from explosions. Far above, his crystalline scales had lost their proud shine and now looked dull and lifeless. Around him, the other survivors whispered among themselves in voices filled with fear and confusion. Prime Speaker Vess coiled in the center of the chamber, her serpentine body forming loops that seemed to shrink with each passing hour. "How long can the shelter hold?" she asked the Coven engineer who maintained the facility. The rock-skinned alien checked his instruments with hands that trembled despite his species' reputation for emotional control. The structure is sound speaker, but our power cells are draining faster than expected. The human jamming systems are forcing our shields to work at maximum capacity, perhaps 6 hours. Maybe less. 6 hours. Vex closed his eyes and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. 3 days ago, he had been commanding fleets that controlled half the galaxy. Now he was trapped underground while human soldiers hunted the scattered remnants of his forces through the burning wreckage of the galactic capital. A shimmer in the air announced the arrival of Director Kane of the Lumen Intelligence Network. The ethereal being's normally bright form flickered weakly as it struggled to maintain cohesion in the electromagnetic chaos surrounding the shelter. "The situation is worse than we calculated," Kane announced in a voice that sounded like distant music. "The humans have not just been hiding military assets, they have been infiltrating our systems for decades." Every alien head in the chamber turned toward the Lumen with expressions of disbelief. Infiltration of Council networks was supposed to be impossible. Each species used different technologies and communication protocols. The barriers between their systems were designed to prevent exactly this kind of penetration. "Explain," Vess hissed through clenched fangs. Kane's form pulsed with what might have been embarrassment or fear. "Every major council decision for the past 50 years shows signs of human influence. Trade routes that favored their expansion. Military deployments that left their colonies undefended. Resource allocations that weakened our strategic reserves. Even the decision to issue the ultimatum appears to have been manipulated." The chamber fell silent except for the distant rumble of destruction from the surface. Vex felt something cold forming in his stomach as the implications became clear. If Kane was right, then the war had not begun 3 days ago. It had been going on for half a century without any of them realizing it. "Impossible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Our security protocols would have detected any intrusion." A new voice answered from the shadows near the shelter entrance. "Would they?" Every weapon in the chamber turned toward the sound as a figure stepped into the light. It appeared to be Dr. Elena Vasquez, a human scientist who had been captured 6 months ago during a raid on a research station. She had been brought to Nexus Prime for interrogation and study. The Council's best experts had spent months trying to understand human psychology and technology by examining her, but as she smiled and removed what looked like a neural interface device, her appearance began to change. Her skin shifted color, her bone structure altered. Her eyes took on a different hue entirely. Advanced biotechnology that the Council did not know existed had allowed her to pass as something she was not. "Surprised?" Elena asked as her transformation completed. "Did you really think we would expand into your territory without understanding your psychology, your weaknesses, your greatest fears?" Vex struggled to his feet, his massive frame shaking with rage and terror. "The research stations!" "The captured humans, the experiments we conducted. All voluntary," Elena replied with the cold satisfaction of someone who had spent years executing a complex plan. "We needed to learn about your technologies, your capabilities, your decision-making processes. Every human you thought you were studying was actually studying you." The shelter's defensive systems suddenly went offline. Emergency lighting bathed the chamber in a red glow that made every face look demonic. Above them, the sound of plasma. Cutters began working through the final barriers that protected the Council leadership. "You see," Elena continued as she checked a device on her wrist, "humans learned something very important during our early expansion. The galaxy is not ruled by the strongest species or the smartest species or even the most advanced species. It is ruled by the species that best understands how to manipulate their enemies." Prime Speaker Vess uncoiled from her defensive position with fury blazing in her multiple eyes. "You are one species against dozens. One world against thousands. Even if you win this battle, you cannot hold the entire galaxy." Elena laughed with genuine amusement. "Hold it? We do not want to hold it. We want to inherit it." The plasma cutters broke through the final barrier with a sound like tearing metal. Human soldiers in full combat armor entered the chamber moving, with the fluid precision of apex predators closing in for the kill. Their weapons remained lowered, but every alien in the shelter knew that could change in an instant. The lead soldier removed his helmet, revealing a scarred face that belonged to someone who had seen too much combat. This is Colonel Rivers of the Terran Liberation Force. The Council of Nexus Prime is hereby dissolved. All surviving members will be transported to secure facilities pending the establishment of new governmental structures. General Dex found his voice despite the fear that threatened to choke him. You cannot simply dissolve a government that has ruled for millions of years. The other species will never accept human authority. Elena walked over to one of the human soldiers and accepted a data pad from him. Actually, they already have. While you were hiding down here, our diplomatic teams have been negotiating with the surviving planetary governments. Most have agreed to join the new Terran Federation in exchange for protection and trade agreements. She handed the pad to Dex, who stared at the screen in growing horror. Government after government had signed documents accepting human leadership. Species that had been enemies for millennia were now united under Earth's banner. The galaxy was being reorganized while the old leadership cowered underground. How? Vess whispered. Simple, Elena replied. We offered them something you never did. A chance to grow instead of stagnate. An opportunity to explore new technologies instead of being locked into obsolete systems. Most importantly, we offered them hope for the future instead of fear of change. Colonel Rivers activated his communication system and spoke to someone beyond the shelter. Cleanup teams report to Level 7. Priority transport required for 23 detainees. Medical teams standing by for alien physiology support. As human soldiers began escorting the former council members toward the exit, Elena made one final observation that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. You convinced yourselves that because humanity was young, we must be naive. You believed that because we were new to the galaxy, we did not understand how it worked, but we understood perfectly. We just decided to change the rules. The last sound the council leadership heard as they were led away was Elena speaking into her communication. Device, Phase 1 complete. Begin Phase 2. Time to show the galaxy what real leadership looks like. 6 months after the fall of Nexus Prime, the galaxy looked nothing like it had before the war. The massive complex that had once housed the Galactic Council now served as the headquarters of the Terran Federation. Human architects had rebuilt the damaged sections using the best technologies from dozens of species, while adding improvements that made the older aliens shake their heads in amazement. President Marcus Reed stood in the former council chambers looking out at the assembled representatives of what had once been the mighty galactic powers. The hall had been redesigned to accommodate both human needs and alien physiologies, but there was no mistaking who held the real authority. Where once humans had stood alone against hostile judgment, now they sat at the head of a new order that stretched across the galaxy. The Corvin mining rights to the Kepler systems will be honored under the new agreements, Reed announced to the gathered delegates. However, all operations will be conducted under Terran oversight to ensure environmental protection and worker safety standards. Elder Bricks of the Corvin Deep Mining Consortium bowed his massive head in acceptance. The proud civilization that had once strip-mined entire star systems now operated under strict guidelines, designed to preserve the galaxy's resources for future generations. Many Corvin leaders had initially resisted the new regulations, but the alternative had been the complete loss of their mining licenses. Ambassador Kane, now serving as Secretary of Alien Affairs, watched the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. The same chamber where he had been threatened and humiliated now hosted negotiations conducted entirely on human terms. The species that had once dismissed humanity as primitive now competed for Earth's favor and approval. The Naxari petition for expanded trade routes has been approved. Reed continued reading from a report prepared by human economists and alien cultural specialists. New shipping lanes will be opened through sectors 7 through 12 with appropriate security measures and environmental safeguards. The Serpentine delegates coiled in their specialized seating arrangements designed by human Engineers who had studied alien comfort requirements more carefully than the Council ever had. Their once bright scales were now marked with patterns that indicated their acceptance of human authority. The species that had called humanity a plague now prospered under Terran protection. In the observation gallery above the main floor, Admiral Blake stood with his senior staff watching the new galactic order take shape. The Phantom Fleet had evolved into the Terran Space Force with ships that no longer hid in the shadows but patrolled openly throughout human space. Their mere presence was enough to maintain peace among species that had been fighting each other for thousands of years. Status report from the Deep Survey Division, Blake asked Commander Vale, who was now serving as Director of Galactic Intelligence. 7 new systems explored this month, Admiral, Vale reported while consulting her neural interface. 3 show signs of habitable worlds suitable for colonization. 2 contain rare mineral deposits that could support major industrial development. The expansion is proceeding ahead of all projected schedules. Blake nodded as he watched a group of young Vorthok students being led through the facility by human guides. These children would grow up in a galaxy where humanity was the dominant species, where human values shaped policy decisions, and where human technology defined the cutting edge of scientific progress. The transformation had not been without its challenges. Some species had attempted to resist the new order through guerrilla warfare and terrorist attacks. Others had tried to form alliances against human expansion. All such efforts had failed when confronted with the simple reality that humanity now controlled the most advanced military force the galaxy had ever seen, but resistance had been much lighter than Earth's planners had expected. Most species had discovered that life under human leadership was actually better than what they had experienced under the Council. Trade flowed more freely. Scientific research advanced more rapidly. Conflicts between different civilizations were resolved through negotiation rather than warfare. The Lumen Collective has requested permission to establish a research station in the Andromeda approach vector, Reed announced to the Chamber. This request has been approved with the understanding that all discoveries will be shared with the Federation scientific community. The ethereal beings that had once considered themselves the intellectual superiors of all other species now eagerly sought human approval for their projects. Their advanced energy manipulation technologies had proven extremely useful when combined with human engineering capabilities. Together, they were developing innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. As the diplomatic session moved toward its conclusion, Reed prepared to make an announcement that would reshape the galaxy's future, even more dramatically than the war itself. The Terran Federation is pleased to announce the establishment of the Galactic Development Initiative, he declared. This program will provide resources, technology, and expertise to help underdeveloped species achieve their full potential. Civilization will be left behind as we build a better future together. The response from the alien delegates was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Species that had been ignored or oppressed by the Council now saw opportunities for growth and advancement that had been denied to them for centuries. The human approach to galactic governance was proving far more inclusive and effective than anything that had come before. Blake watched the proceedings with the satisfaction of someone who had helped architect a fundamental transformation of galactic civilization. The Council had ruled through fear and suppression, maintaining their power by keeping other species weak and divided. The Terran Federation offered something completely different. What do you think the historians will say about all this? Vale asked as they watched Reed conclude the session. That depends on who writes the histories, Blake replied. But I suspect they will say that the galaxy finally grew up, that it stopped being ruled by fear and started being guided by hope. As the delegates filed out of the chamber to return to their homeworlds with news of the Federation's latest decisions, Blake reflected on how completely the balance of power had shifted. The species that had once dismissed humanity as too young and primitive to matter now competed for positions in Earth's government and military. The transformation had not happened through conquest alone. It had happened because humanity had offered. something that the galaxy desperately needed but had never experienced. Leadership that actually cared about the welfare of those being led. A vision of the future that included growth and progress rather than stagnation and control, Reed made. His final announcement as the session drew to a close. The Terran Federation extends an invitation to all species willing to embrace cooperation over conflict and progress over tradition. Together we will explore new worlds, develop new technologies, and build a civilization worthy of our children's. Children. As the Great Hall slowly emptied, Blake knew they were witnessing the end of one age and the beginning of another. The Galactic Council had maintained order through strength and fear. The Terran Federation was building something much more powerful. They were building a galaxy that actually wanted to be led. The age of human dominance had not come through conquest alone. It had come through the simple demonstration that there was a better way to live. And now that the galaxy had seen what was possible, there would be no going back to the old ways. The stars belonged to humanity. Now, not because they had taken them by force, but because they had earned the right to guide others toward a brighter future.